Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. Among modern ungulate mammals, the hippos seem to stand out as something of an oddity given their highly distinctive heavyweight appearance, massive jaws and semi-aquatic habits. Due to their heftiness and somewhat comical features, hippos are often portrayed as amusing, clumsy and buffoonish characters in Western popular culture, which is in direct contrast to the aggressive territorial animals that they really are. Endemic to the continent of Africa, there are just two living species of these chunky artiodactyls, with these being the large and famous Hippopotamus amphibius and the much smaller forest-dwelling pygmy hippo Choeropsis liberiensis. However, the family Hippopotamidae was significantly more diverse in the past, with representatives also being found across Eurasia until the late Pleistocene circa 15,000 years ago. All members of the group would have been united by a suite of anatomical features, including four-toed feet in which all digits made contact with the ground, three-chambered stomachs, smooth skin that lacks sweat glands, as well as proportionally large skulls equipped with sharp, ever-growing tusks. Some of these traits are superficially similar to those of pigs, with it once being broadly accepted that the two groups were close relatives. Since the advent of genetic testing in the 1990s, however, it's instead become very apparent that the closest living relatives of hippos are actually the cetaceans. Together, these form the clade Whippomorpha, which diverged from other artiodactyls during the early Eocene roughly 55 million years ago. While the evolutionary development of cetaceans is now well understood, the origin of the hippos was, until recently, relatively obscure, with the family Hippopotamidae appearing in the fossil record rather suddenly during the Middle Miocene. Thankfully, it's now been established that hippos developed from within a group of heavy-set artiodactyls known as the anthracotherioids, which would have somewhat resembled their modern cousins, but were often smaller, more lightly built, and possessed narrower skulls. Originating during the Middle Eocene in Eurasia, the anthracotheres were almost certainly not a natural family, instead representing a grade within the broader group Ancodonta, which included all those members of Whippomorpha that were more closely related to hippos than to cetaceans. Given that both whales and hippos are tied to the water and possess similar auditory structures, it would be fair to assume that they evolved from small semi-aquatic ancestors, similar to the early cetacean relative Indohyus. However, the most basal representatives of the hippo line ancodonts were animals such as the Choeropotamids, which again may or may not be a natural grouping. These were relatively small artiodactyls that were endemic to the European archipelago from the Middle Eocene to the early Oligocene circa 30 million years ago. The best known of these was the genus Amphirhagatherium from the UK, France and Germany, which was a roughly fox-sized ungulate with a very unspecialised body plan typical of early artiodactyls, including a long heavy tail, narrow pointed skull and generalist teeth that indicate a diet of soft plants and fruit. It may have been closely related to the larger Choeropotamus, which was endemic to the same region at about the same time. Known mostly from skull material, there are currently 5 accepted species, with the largest being C. parisiensis, which could have reached 58 kilograms or 130 pounds. Like Amphirhagatherium, members of this genus possessed elongated narrow snouts and were likely omnivores, with a diet and flat bunodont molars comparable to modern pigs. Choeropotamids died out during the early Oligocene, although may have been closely related to the aforementioned anthracotheres, from which the hippopotamids would later develop. These would have generally resembled skinnier, pig-like hippos, with large yet narrow skulls, broadly splayed digits, which indicate that these animals favoured swampy woodlands, and full sets of 44 teeth. Their limbs were also often proportionally longer than those of hippos, with anthracotheres lacking the semi-aquatic adaptations of their living relatives. The oldest known genus, Elomeryx, originated during the Middle Eocene in Southeast Asia and was relatively small, measuring about 1.5 metres or 4.9 feet long. The skull was quite elongated and vaguely horse-like, with Elomeryx spreading into Europe by the late Eocene and North America by the early Oligocene. Other early forms include genera such as the small dog-sized Siamotherium from the mid to late Eocene of Thailand, which helped to confirm that anthracotheres were not a natural family, but were instead part of the clade Hippopotamoidea. Some forms, such as the type genus Anthracotherioum, were long-lived and widespread, producing up to 8 species that ranged across most of Eurasia and persisted into the early Miocene. The largest species, such as the European A. magnum, were comparable in size to the modern pygmy hippo at around 250 kilograms or 551 pounds in mass, with their skulls being highly elongated and complete with somewhat pig-like narrow jaws. It was a close relative of the genus Heptacodon within the grouping Anthracotherioidae. This pig-sized animal was endemic to North America and was among the first anthracotheres to reach the continent during the Middle Eocene. The most massive of these basal hippopotamoids was the genus Palaeoanthracotherioids from the late Oligocene of Europe and Pakistan, which would have looked a bit like a terrestrial longer-legged hippo that could reach 2 metric tons in mass. Another long-lasting group of anthracotheres were the diminutive Microbunodontids, some of which were comparable in size to modern hyraxes. The genus Microbunodon was a bit larger, weighing up to 25 kilograms and possessed sexually dimorphic upper canines, which were curved and saber-like in adult males. Interestingly, this genus was very long-lived, originating during the late Eocene and persisting all the way up until the early Pliocene in India and Southeast Asia, which is a time span of 30 million years. During the early Miocene, when the permanent land connection between Africa and Eurasia opened up, the anthracotheres were some of the first northern mammals to travel southwards into the continent, with an early example being the genus Jaguamerix, native to the Qattara Depression of early Miocene Egypt circa 19 million years ago. This small deer-sized animal dwelt in a tropical marshland ecosystem, with oxygen isotope analyses finding that Jaguamerix was probably semi-aquatic. Its jawbones contained a number of mental foramina, with there being 8 on each side of the jaw, suggesting the presence of large flexible lips and a mobile snout, which helps to explain the genus name, which refers to Mick Jagger, another prehistoric creature with prominent lips. Other anthracotheres of the diverse grouping Bothriodontidae arrived in Africa at an even earlier date, such as the genus Bothriogenius, which dwelt in what is now Egypt during the late Eocene and early Oligocene. As this clade evolved, its members gradually developed larger body sizes and increasingly selenodont molars for more efficient processing of tougher vegetation. By the Miocene, these animals had become highly diverse and widespread, and began to produce forms that were closer in lifestyle to modern hippos. A good example would be the strangely named genus Libicosaurus from the mid to late Miocene of North Africa and Uganda. It was about the same size as a small modern hippopotamus amphibius, but with a noticeably longer, narrower skull. Dwelling in lush, marshy environments, Libicosaurus species, especially the derived L. bari, were semi-aquatic but were relatively lightly built paddle swimmers that preferred shallower water than living hippos, also being well adapted for grazing. This would be the last of the African anthracotheres, dying out during the late Miocene circa 6 million years ago. It was closely related to the younger genus Mericopotamus, which first appeared during the Middle Miocene and was native to South and Southeast Asia. This sheep-sized animal possessed a relatively blunt, deep snout in comparison to other anthracotheres, which, in combination with its specialised teeth, indicates a diet comprised mostly of grasses. This was the last of the non-hippopotamid anthracotheres, dying out by around 5 million years ago during the Pliocene. The true hippos almost certainly first evolved in Africa, although their origins are still relatively obscure. However, the 2015 discovery of the Bothriodontian genus Epirigenis from the Oligocene of Kenya demonstrated that hippos were indeed descended from anthracotheres, with this genus found to be the sister taxon to Hippopotamidae. However, this still leaves a gap of about 10 million years between Epirigenis and the oldest hippos such as Kenyapotamus, which first appeared during the Middle Miocene in East Africa. Isotopic analyses have shown that this genus consumed a mixture of C3 and C4 plants, which contrasts with the mostly grazing diet of H. amphibius, but is comparable to that of the pygmy hippo. Speaking of which, both living species are members of the subfamily Hippopotaminae, with this group first appearing in the fossil record by around 8 million years ago. The oldest of these was the well-known and widespread genus Archaeopotamus, which was native to eastern and northern Africa, as well as the Arabian Peninsula, Spain and Italy, producing 4 species and ranging between 7.5 and 2.5 million years ago. Archaeopotamus possessed a narrower muzzle than living hippos, and was comparatively slender in build, weighing between 500 and 900 kilograms, or up to 2,000 pounds. The more derived genus Hexaprotodon, meanwhile, first appeared circa 6 million years ago, and was native to South and Southeast Asia. Named for the 3 pairs of forward-pointing incisors found in some of the species, Hexaprotodon as a genus was once thought to have included the modern pygmy hippo, although later researchers found this not to be the case. These animals were again smaller than H. amphibius, standing up to 4 feet tall at the shoulder and possessing a more slender build, although had developed a similar semi-aquatic lifestyle independently. Hexaprotodon largely vanished from Southeast Asia during the Middle Pleistocene, but persisted in the Indian subcontinent almost until the end of the period circa 15,000 years ago. These would then become extinct due to a period of severe drought, which caused the fragmentation of their wetland habitats, with there also being the possibility that these animals were hunted by humans. The extensive fossil history of Hexaprotodon stands in contrast to the living pygmy hippo Choeropsis liberiensis, which, as far as I'm aware, has no fossil history at all. Native to the tropical forests and swamps of West Africa, it's recently been proposed that these rather cute animals may be closely related to the poorly known extinct genus Sowatherium, which lived in what is now Chad during the Pliocene between 5.3 and 4 million years ago. Modern pygmy hippos are, as their name suggests, far smaller than the more famous Hippopotamus amphibius, standing just 1 metre or 3 feet 2 inches tall at a maximum, and weighing between 180 and 275 kilograms, or up to 606 pounds, with comparatively short, blunt muzzles, greyish-brown, smooth, hairless skin, and a more gracile skeleton. These cryptic nocturnal herbivores are more terrestrial than H. amphibius, although still readily take to the water in order to cool down and to moisturise their skin. Like their larger cousins, pygmy hippos are unable to sweat, and instead release an unusual pinkish-coloured secretion from their skin known as hipposudoric acid, which has antiseptic and sunscreening properties. In terms of behaviour, these animals are quite different from H. amphibius, either living alone or in mated pairs. They emerge at night to feed on low-growing forest vegetation, such as ferns, broad-leaved plants, herbs, sedges, and fallen fruit. Despite generally being relatively docile and not considered a threat to humans, pygmy hippos do still possess an unpredictable temper and will attack people if they feel the need to do so. These animals are listed as endangered due to threats from habitat destruction and illegal hunting, with most of the remaining populations dwelling in Liberia, with smaller numbers present in Sierra Leone, Guinea and the Ivory Coast. With the species unfortunately being extirpated from Nigeria, there are estimated to be less than 2,500 individuals in the wild, although captive breeding programs have generally been successful. Meanwhile, the genus Hippopotamus first diverged from other members of the family during the early Pliocene circa 5 million years ago, and almost certainly evolved in East Africa. Members of the genus diversified during the early Pleistocene, including the formidable Hippopotamus gorgops, which first appeared around 2 million years ago and was native to northern and eastern Africa, as well as the Levant. In life, this animal would have strongly resembled the living common hippo, but was significantly larger, with big males reaching almost 6 feet tall at the shoulder and perhaps weighing up to 3 metric tons. Its eyes and nasal openings were more highly elevated than in H. amphibius, hinting at a more aquatic lifestyle, although the robust limbs indicate that it was also capable of easily moving about on land. Early Pleistocene age remains of this species from Algeria, Kenya and Eritrea show the distinct signs of being butchered by archaic humans, although it's unclear whether these animals were actively hunted or scavenged. In the Levant, it lived alongside the smaller species Hippopotamus behemoth, although these may simply be synonymous with H. gorgops. While often thought to have been the largest hippo to ever live, recent studies have shown that its possible descendant, Hippopotamus antiquus, was probably more massive. Antiquus was native to much of Europe, Turkey and the southern Caucasus region during the early and middle Pleistocene, with the oldest known remains having been recovered from Italy and Greece, dating to circa 2 million years ago. Recent volumetric estimates have found that this species likely weighed about 3.2 metric tons, which is roughly double the weight of an average modern H. amphibius. However, Antiquus population showed a trend of decreasing size over time, with early Pleistocene individuals being noticeably larger than those from the Middle Pleistocene, which likely reflects changes in climate and food availability. Compared to the modern common hippo, Antiquus possessed slender elongated snouts, with higher placed eye sockets, as well as feet with shorter metapodial bones. The species was also more heavily aquatic than H. amphibius, spending less time on land, as well as feeding on water plants rather than grasses. During warmer interglacial periods, this species dwelt in what is now France, Germany, the Netherlands and southern England, although populations would have retreated southwards into the Mediterranean as the climate cooled. Antiquus died out on the European mainland by around 400,000 years ago, whereupon it was largely replaced by Hippopotamus amphibius. Although the species also gave rise to the insular Cretan dwarf hippo H. kreuzbergi. As its name suggests, this animal dwelt on the island of Crete during the earlier Middle Pleistocene, and was far smaller than its mainland ancestor, weighing just 400 kilograms or 880 pounds. It was also much better adapted for a terrestrial grazing niche, with the animal walking on its hooves rather than on its footpads. Another Mediterranean dwarf hippo, H. minor, was also endemic to Cyprus from the Middle Pleistocene to the early Holocene, although it's currently uncertain as to whether the species was descended from H. antiquus or H. amphibius. This was the smallest hippo to have ever lived, standing just 70 centimetres or 2.3 feet tall, and weighing just 130 kilograms or 290 pounds. In life, it would have superficially resembled the living pygmy hippo of West Africa, complete with a similar shorter muzzle and a more terrestrial lifestyle. Along with the Cyprus dwarf elephant, it was the only relatively large herbivore native to the island, with both being hunted to extinction by the first human settlers around 12,000 years ago. In contrast, the living common hippo, H. amphibius, is found in a very wide yet fragmented range across the African continent, from Sudan to South Africa. The species diverged from other members of the genus Hippopotamus roughly 3 million years ago, although the oldest unambiguous remains date to the Middle Pleistocene of Eritrea. These imposing animals are easily recognisable by their burly, barrel-shaped torsos, almost hairless skin, wide mouths, short legs and large size, with an average adult weighing about 1.4 metric tons. Hippos inhabit rivers, lakes and swamps, with stretches of water presided over by territorial bulls that attempt to control groups of females and their calves. While aggressively territorial in the water, these animals tend to be more solitary and wary when on land, emerging at night to graze on grasses. Despite their rotund appearance, hippos are surprisingly fast and agile runners, while their aggressive and unpredictable behaviour make them among the most dangerous large mammals on Earth. Having no natural predators when fully grown, hippos put their formidable tusks to good use when fighting over territory or mating rights, with the females also being highly protective of their young. During the Pleistocene and earlier Holocene, H. amphibius had a much wider range, inhabiting almost the entirety of the African continent, the Arabian Peninsula, Turkey and the Levant, as well as much of Europe, extending as far north as the UK during warmer interglacial periods. The species died out in Europe between 40,000 and 30,000 years ago, with the youngest known populations being found in Greece and the Rhine Rift Valley of southwestern Germany. During the African humid period of the early Holocene, hippos could be found across the Maghreb and the Green Sahara, while they persisted in the Levant until less than 3,000 years ago. Famously, the species once dwelt across the Egyptian section of the Nile River, all the way up to the Mediterranean coast, although their populations began to fragment during the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, and are extinct in the country today. Modern African populations are ranked as vulnerable due to habitat loss and poaching for their meat and ivory. This species also gave rise to several insular forms during the Pleistocene, including the Sicilian hippo H. pentlandi, and the smaller Maltese hippo H. melitensis. Additionally, Madagascar was once home to several dwarf hippo species during the Pleistocene and Holocene, with one of these, Hippopotamus lemurli, potentially only dying out roughly 400 years ago, with there being persistent claims made by local people that these animals may have survived into far more recent times, although these have yet to be verified. And on that mysterious note, thanks for watching everyone. The next episode will be covering the Plotopterids, a family of large, flightless, superficially penguin-like seabirds that dwelt in the Pacific from the Eocene to the Miocene. See you again soon. Cheerio.